I've said welcome once before, so really are pleased to see you here tonight. It is a very special evening. Many of you, worked with many of you some years ago, other people who are earlier in their careers, and I think there's something here for everyone. MCR21 is very special, and it's also very special to have Harry Coventry here tonight, who was a cameraman on MCR21 at the 1966 World Cup final. And I can just let you into a secret. I did ask him just now, did the ball cross the line? And he said with a smile, of course it did. So I leave you to draw your own conclusions from that. I'd just like to thank all our colleagues here at NEP and Steve Jenkins, the President of UK and Ireland NEP, for making this venue available to us, that we can have such a great evening. I'd also like to thank Broadcast Television Technology Trust, who are the people behind the renovation of MCR21, for coming along tonight. I suppose as we look back to it, the first large-scale outside broadcast, most of us consider it's probably 1937, George VI's coronation, and then coming, which was actually a converted bus by Marconi, so telegenic weren't the first. Converted buses happened before that. And then we come further down the road and we see the truck here tonight that was acquired by the BBC 1964, 63, 64 and commissioned then. And then we come right through to the trucks we see today. And I think those of you that have been at different stages of the outside broadcast journey are just astounded by seeing both the one from the 60s and the one from today. And as I say, the teasers for our next event in the autumn, let's just see if we can sniff around at what it might be like in 10 years' time, where we might be, what the equipment might look like. So, tonight is in two bits. The first bit will be from Brian Summers, Nick Gilby and Harry to talk about MCR21 and the work done then. Then there'll be an opportunity for a few questions, which I'll wander around with a mic. I'll jump to you and just catch my eye, and I'll come to you and we'll get that. And then Daff Rees from NEP, who is their strategic technology person, will come and talk to us a bit about how we got from there to there, and maybe a little hint about where these are going in the future. So that's this evening. Without more ado, I'd like to hand over to Nick and Brian.
Hello. I'd like to start by thanking the RTS and NEP for giving us the opportunity of showing off MCR21, our restored 1960s BBC television mobile control room. So thank you to Tim Marshall and Cara Myhill from the RTS Technology, and to Hannah Green and the NEP team. I'd just like to show you a photo. This photo is a BBC camera covering the finish line of the boat race at Chiswick Bridge. It's in 1968. Just visible under the bridge are a couple of BBC vehicles, and one of these is MCR21. These are the pictures I took when I was a young teenager. I was fascinated by these technical vehicles that brought us live pictures. Move on some 50 years, and my first visit to Brian Summers at his home in Camberley. Brian runs the virtual museum of the broadcast television camera. I had come to see his extensive collection, but when I arrived, I was greeted with a view of MCR21 parked in his drive. I was amazed. I thought all 10 of these 1960s PIOB units had been sent abroad or scrapped in this country. It wasn't long before Brian and I started talking about the idea of restoring MCR21 to its original state. In order to achieve this, we needed money and lots of volunteers. So the Broadcast Television Technology Trust was formed. After successfully receiving a substantial grant from the National Lottery Fund, we started a 3-year project to restore MCR21 and tell its story. It was always our intention to include young people, those who are interested in television, and in particular, the technology. During the project, we worked with students from Solent University and also from the Media School at Royal Holloway. All the students we worked with had been enthusiastic, and a few interested in the technology. Oscar Williams, seen here on the left of the photo in front of Brian, he visual mixed the recording of the jazz concert. This was using Solent University's own outside broadcast unit. The 4 cameras were also recorded individually so they could be replayed inside MCR's production area. You might have seen that earlier. Oscar also came with me to Goodwood in 2019 to record the individual feeds from 4 of the 12 cameras which covered the racetrack. I'm glad to say that Oscar did get a job as a trainee vision engineer with Racing TV and is now one of their guarantee engineers. Unfortunately, there are not many students like Oscar, as most of the students have got their eyes on non-technical jobs. Their ambition to become TV or film directors. It is very much the Trust's ambition to encourage young people to take an interest in the technology side of the industry. As part of the Heritage Fund project, As part of the Heritage Fund project, we made a short animation video about MCR21 covering a football match. This is aimed at primary school children, catch them young, as we say.
This is a BBC mobile control room for television, MCR21. It was built over 50 years ago and designed by some clever engineers at the BBC. Today, MCR21 is travelling a long way from the television station to televise a football match. There are lots of other BBC vehicles which follow MCR21 to the football ground. Here is a vehicle carrying 4 cameras. These are positioned around the football pitch. This camera has 4 lenses. The shortest one gives a wide shot of the grounds, and the longest one can see a long way. It is used to show a close-up of the players. The camera operator can choose which lens to use by rotating the turret. Inside MCR21, there are lots of TV screens showing the pictures from the 4 cameras. The director is sitting in front of the vision mixer. By pressing the different buttons, he can decide whether to show a wide shot of the game or a close-up of the players. Here is the transmitter aerial on top of another BBC vehicle, which has an extending mast. The pictures and sound of the match are sent using the transmitter back to the television station. From the television station, the pictures are transmitted to all the homes where people can watch the football match.
At present, we just have one Pi Mark 6 camera. Only 54 of these cameras were produced, and as far as we know, only 4 of them survived. Up until 2 years ago, these 4 were all held in the Science Museum store at Rawton near Swindon. For quite a considerable time, we negotiated with the Science Museum to release at least one of them. It is a lengthy process. Understandably, as we're talking about the national collection kept for future generations to marvel at and to learn from. Fortunately, there have been a few enlightened curators looking after the broadcast collection who realised that we could be trusted to look after these precious objects. Ellie Groom, who was the curator of broadcast back in 2019, agreed to put in motion the procedure for us to receive one of the Pi Mark 6 cameras. 3 years later, Brian travelled to Rawton to collect the Pi camera. And that's it, arriving on a pallet. When Brian got back to his home in Camberley, he found the camera with a 21/4 engraved plate on it. This meant that it was camera 4 from MCR21. After a strange journey through many owners, the camera has really been reunited with its original mobile control room, and actually may have been the camera which I took a photo of back in 1968. Apart from the Science Museum, our Trust has benefited from a number of organisations who have donated equipment to us. The British Film Institute is donating equipment that was acquired when the Museum of the Moving Image, MOMI, was closed some 20 years ago. The Pi monitors from the BFI will mean that we have a full complement of the correct 14-inch monitors for MCR21. The BBC has also donated us equipment when it becomes redundant. This is now BBC common policy, instigated by BBC project engineer Mike Steed in 2019. Before this date, if the redundant equipment had little monetary value, it would land up in a skip. We were able to save some historically significant equipment when the BBC closed the receiving station at Swains Lane, Highgate. This included the end cables which connected Alexandra Palace to Broadcasting House, dating back to 1937.
Yeah.
That's also 22 metres.
Yeah.
PCM distribution 2.
It's 22.
Yeah. And they're all short circuit.
Right.
And all those should be pressurised, or
And
would it
all
be?
of them are short circuit.
All that group are short circuit.
Okay.
The next group here, marked Swains Lane BH1,
Swains Lane BH1,
is 22 metres and it's open circuit.
BH1, open circuit.
It was some time ago, and you very kindly got in touch with us to save this equipment. What do you feel about it now?
Well, I'm very emotionally attached to it because I actually installed all of this sort of 35 years ago, and the idea of it all being ripped out and just going to a dump or being melted down seemed to be a dreadful waste, and it could be historically preserved in some form or another.
What do you think the historical significance is?
Well, it's all tied up with the BBC's past, how the Alexandra Palace connected to Broadcasting House to carry the news into the new network. And also, of course, all the outside broadcast facilities here, which I think started in 1937.
That's why it's not very far. There it is.
And what's that telling you?
That's telling us how far the cable is actually going, and that's a short circuit at the far end.
going to AP.
No, I imagine it's going as far as the manhole.
Yeah. In fact, on the day the day after
The mention of Alexandra Palace brings me to my final thoughts about protecting the past achievements that Britain has made, both in television production and technology. There have been a few attempts to put this right. The Museum of the Moving Image did cover the story of television, and then was the BBC Experience. Both failed. I believe that was because financially they didn't live up to the expectations. Back in 2014, the National Lottery Hedgeridge Fund announced that they would provide £18 million to bring back to life the two original studios at Alexandra Palace, dating back to 1936. Because of the considerable overspend on the renovation of the East Wing, it was decided quietly to drop the plan to renovate the studios and concentrate on resurrecting the adjacent theatre. While the theatre may have had an honoured past, Alexandra Palace is recognised worldwide as the birthplace of a regular television service. I do believe there is a strong argument for there to be a combined music and experience in London dedicated to the history of television. Getting back to MCR21, we planned a tour in July 2022 to show off our restored BBC unit. Here is two of those events. Just before that, that is what the studios look like now at the Alexandra Palace. It is a great shame.
Yeah, that'll be fine. Perfect.
Now, the first television coverage here at Wimbledon was in 1937, and this year we have a wonderfully restored scanner, a mobile control room, MCR21. It's been restored by ex-BBC staff. The camera here as well, dating back to the 60s when this scanner would have been in use. And inside we would have had the director and the editor and engineering staff. Look at this. Oh my word, it is absolutely beautiful. This in itself is a piece of history. And it's the perfect place from which to look back on the history of Centre Court. As I say, Brian, run VT.
Thanks, guys, and don't forget there are Dynamo Kids clubs all over the UK. Just go to their website and search for the one in your local area.
Now, Alex is surrounded by some fantastic sporting memories.
Oh, I am indeed. How cosy is it in here? Now, this is Mobile Control Room 21, MCR21, one of the 10 vans built in 1963 so that the BBC could cover more outside broadcasts, including great sporting events like the 1966 World Cup. Do you remember this?
And here comes Hurst. He's got some people are on the pitch. They think it's all over. It is now. It's 4. Hurst has got 3. It is all over. England are the world champions. 6.
What a moment. Well, I'm joined by Harry Coventry, who worked in the van as a senior cameraman and who actually worked on the 1966 World Cup. Harry, welcome. Thank you so much for being with us. What was the sort of standout event for you then, the one you enjoyed the most, or the one maybe you felt most important?
Yeah, I think one of the most dramatic was Winston Churchill's funeral. We had some wonderful camera positions there, and the drama of the place was quite amazing. I was on the front steps as the coffin was taken up, and it made me weep.
Oh, was this the type of camera then, Harry, that you would have been operating?
Yes, absolutely. Just one of these with a zoom lens on the front, and it was our standard kit from 1964 onwards. It was brilliant. This was my first van as my first appointment as a senior cameraman, so it was special to me, absolutely special.
You know, these cameramen we've got, they don't know, they're born, they've got these lightweight machines, all they do is complain. Yes. Harry, you were the real deal. I've been in them this afternoon and it really is lovely, so thank you so much, Harry. Thank you so much.
I'll introduce Brian now, who's going to continue the story about MCR21.
So, whilst the computer is counting to 10 slowly, I'd like to say good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and I would like to thank Nick for his excellent appraisal of our Trust's work in restoring MCR21. For my part, I will describe some of the new technologies used by the BBC for the first time in the 10 main fleet scanners, of which MCR21 is the third one built. From the vision point of view, the triad of vision mixer, SPG and camera formed the brain, heart and eyes. In the early 1960s, which was a decade of rapid change, broadcasting was on the cusp of going solid state, and MCR21 was of hybrid construction, with many units being transistorized, but valves doing the heavy lifting. The BBC designed MX1501 10-channel vision mixer. It used for the first time germanium diodes as the switching elements for the video. This had a number of benefits. No relay splats, but the big thing was the ability to do wipes and captions as well as the usual cuts and fades. The fully solid state main and reserve SPGs were made by Ferguson, and they could operate on 405, 525 and 625 lines with Genlock, Crystal Lock and Mains Lock. All this was pre-NatLock. The changeover between standards required changing several of the plug-in boards in the SPG, and other units like the monitors and cameras needed switching or links changing, not a 5-minute job. MCR21 had 4 Pi Mark 6 cameras, as Nick mentioned. There was also a provision for a 5th one. They never had the 5th one, there was no money. They were built to a BBC OB specification, and this resulted in a heavy, at 77 kilos, camera, which met the specification but did not appeal to other broadcasters, so only some 50 odd were made. There were reliability challenges in use, but they did produce very good pictures, as noted in a later redeployment of the cameras at the Golders Green Hippodrome. The sound mixer had 20 channels, divided into 3 groups, with main, group and PA outputs. It had comprehensive level balancing, but was a flat response mixer with no equalization. A solid state designed by Pi, using plug-in modules for ease of maintenance and quick replacement. In the event of a power outage, MCR21 could continue in sound only, as the mixer, communications and lighting would revert to battery operation. As well as the main units, there were a number of smaller firsts, the things that glue an OB unit together. The use of a Muser jack field, distribution amplifiers, a vision matrix, test signal generators and a measuring oscilloscope. It is interesting to note that the physical layout is less than ideal. With no prior experience, remember this is the first time they had distribution amplifiers, they were down at floor level, which made adjusting the gain a bit tricky, as you couldn't hold the knob and look at the scope at the same time. Tricky, that one. Oh, and the jack field was at ceiling level, just to make it. Well, the chaps had no, the first time a jack field had been used in an OB van. Where do we put it? Oh, there's a space. In 1969, MCR21 was colorized with 2 PC60s cameras. These were ex-Television Centre presentation who didn't want them. The first programme was the investiture of His Royal Highness the Prince of Wales, and it was the MCR21's first colour programme, so nothing like being thrown in at the deep end. The BBC MX1501 mixer, as mentioned earlier, was a success. The design was colorised and used in the next 2 generations of OB vans, the types 1 and 2. It was also used in studios, with some of them remaining in service into the 1980s. Part of the point I'm trying to make is the evolution of OB vans continues, and as the technology changes, the functions remain similar. Cameras, vision mixing, monitor stack, picture routing, sound mixer, they all have their origins in the past. It has been our objective to restore MCR21 to as near its as-new condition as possible. However, there are a number of changes made for practical reasons. Monitors is one of them. The original Pi 8428822, the part number, monitors were not a great success. Only one is known to survive and it is incomplete. So we chose to install a slightly later Pi model which is more reliable and more importantly available. However, there is a long-term problem with all CRT monitors, and that is tube life. They're not being made anymore and regunning is almost impossible. As we wish to show MCR21 in a simulated working mode, we have fitted LCD monitors in front of the CRT monitors, so we preserve the tube life. As you see today, we have two CRT monitors pulled forward for this particular engineering showing. Cameras, as Nick said, only 4 are known to survive, and I'll not go over what he said again, other than the 4th one doesn't appear on their inventory. We know they've got it, they don't know they've got it. Now, if it could be found, maybe we could have it. So, if you imagine their big store, and the scenario reminds me of the closing sequence of one of the Indiana Jones movies. It may be that we will have guest cameras, and an example is the Pi Mark 7 shown today. Slide 9. Hard to find original units. Some of the original equipment is long gone and replacements have been or are to be constructed. An example of this is the Vision Matrix, functionally the same and similar in appearance. Much metalwork has to be remade as near original as possible. The Vision engineers' desks are an example of this. Still on the wants list is the original pulse and bar generator made by Gresham Lyon. To a BBC design GE4504, this was commercially available and used by the GPO and others, as well as at the BBC. Your help is needed. Will you become a friend of the MCR21 and our trust? Thank you for your attention, and may I invite any questions?
Ladies and gentlemen, if you could just catch my eye, I have the roving mic here, so if anyone has any questions, and perhaps Daff could come and get wired up, ready for the next piece. Does anyone have any questions on MCR21?
I'm David Reed, BBC
Hello, David.
Designs. I'm just wondering, looking inside that camera and all those valves and components, give us a rundown how easy it is to get all those individual bits these days.
Some are easier than others, and the most difficult components are the wound ones. The transformer is particularly awkward. The capacitors and resistors can be suitable replacements can be found, and some valves can be difficult, especially if they've got audio connections, but generally not too much of a problem. It's the wound components that are the hard bit.
All right, Paul Middleton from the STLD. Question of interest really is, do you have any idea of what the BBC actually spent on buying and equipping the MCR originally?
I'd love to know that.
Right.
There was a specification written for the vehicle, I think it was TV90, and I'd love a copy of it. And also there would be a lot of correspondence over the price, because the BBC and Pi would have been negotiating for ages over the cost.
Right, so you haven't been looking through the Written Archive Centre to try and find it yet then?
I did visit Written Archive some time ago, and in a way, from my point of view, it was very disappointing. There was lots of information about programmes, people, documentation, but virtually no technical information at all.
It does seem that the written archive is purely about production, and it's a great shame that a lot of that technical information has gone. Whether it's stored somewhere else, we will try and find out, but no success so far.
So there's a project. Anyone who can find out how much that truck costs, please send it to us and we'll get it in the next copy of Television Magazine.
On the subject of documentation, engineering documentation, I've been building for several years a library. I've got an awful lot of technical handbooks for this and that, and things like a full set of BBC ACOs and stuff. So job number 489,352B is the creation of what you might call a technical written archive. It's an aspiration.
Does anyone else have a question?
Brian, David LeBreton. Have you made any progress in resurrecting the Pi Mark 6s that you managed to extract?
No. Well, to be more specific, the camera when it arrived was a little bit incomplete. I did manage to find some spares for the power supply in my junk box, fairly extensive junk box, but the difficult cable between the camera CCU and the OCP was missing. It's a complex cable. There's some 75 odd pins on the plug. The plug, for those who recognise it, the Varicon plugs that we've often used for sound, the little grey things about that big, which are 56 ways. This is a big version of that with 75 ways. And there is hope that one is lurking in that Science Museum store. The other great difficulty is I haven't got any circuit diagrams. When I started this, I thought, oh, that won't be a problem. Perhaps they're in the same cardboard box as the OCP cable.
Just to add, getting into Rawton is more difficult than getting into Fort Knox at the moment. We've been negotiating for about 3 or 4 months to do that.
Brian, Nick, thank you so much for the contribution. Maybe some questions at the end, so don't run away. Daff, while you come and prepare, I'd just like to ask Harry. Harry, it's wonderful to have you here. Harry, when I joined the BBC, when I was an OB director, Harry was one of the senior stage managers. And the thing I was talking with Harry when we came in the car together, the thing I and many other directors appreciated is, A, we didn't know the wealth of experience. It's really only tonight I learned how much this guy has done. But one was very sensitive as a rookie director, because we all thought we knew all the answers, that Harry had a wonderful way of, with charm, but also with assertiveness, just suggesting that there might be a better way to do it. And I think many of us will never forget that, Harry, and how much you did and how much we appreciate for that. But Harry, this piece of a kit here tonight is such a historic piece. I mean, you've mentioned on the clip here about your memories of Churchill's funeral, but all of us think of that iconic moment, 1966. It's a bit like Kennedy being shot. We remember where we were. I remember where I was. I was a novice sculler at St Neots Regatta, and no one was watching the rowing. Even in those days, they had television screens on the bank. Everyone was watching the World Cup final. No one was watching the rowing. Just tell us a little bit about your memories of that day.
It was a day we never actually thought would actually happen, because we did my unit. I was a senior cameraman on MCR21 from its inception in 1964, and when we got to the World Cup, no one expected England to get past the first round, basically, you know. The two great West Ham players were always falling over their own feet most of the time, and we were never expected to get past Portugal and Eusebio and the Germans. And eventually, when that time happened, and the immortal words, you know, now they think it's all over, happened, it was amazing. And we suddenly realized then that we'd been part of a moment in time which was logged in people's memories. We weren't aware of it at the time, and it became a part of the history of not only the BBC's coverage, because it was the last time we actually won a bloody World Cup, but also it was one of the highlights that this vehicle actually managed to do. You know, when I joined it in 1964, I'd just been promoted as senior cameraman, and I walked up the door and it was all brand spanking new. We got the cameras out and played with them. It was lovely. But we didn't realize what we would actually do with this vehicle. In August that time, we did the first match of the day. You know, it was Alan Chivers asked me to go to his office, Kensington House, and we talked about how it had to be kept secret. You know, all the riggers had to be sworn to secrecy. We all had to be sworn to. And when we got to Liverpool, it was Liverpool against Arsenal in August, and we weren't allowed to tell people in the ground as we parked in the car park what we were there for. So it was all terribly hush-hush because they thought no one would actually go to the match if they could see it in the box in the evening. You know, we did Winston Churchill's funeral, which was, I mentioned to you earlier, was quite some of the most magnificent shots I've ever seen. From one of my cameras was actually built out through the top of the dome. They actually put the scaffold poles through the dome of St Paul's. How they got them there, God only knows. They must have cut a piece out, I don't know. But they built the rostrum. We had to get right up onto the little wedding cake at the top and pass the camera out over about 3 feet of fresh air onto the rostrum. But the pictures shown from there looking down Fleet Street between the two towers were fantastic. And I was on the camera on the memorial just in front of the steps, and my own memories are almost tearful. It was really one of those moments that you remember forever. We did some wonderful things. It was a great vehicle to work on.
Harry, thank you so much. So your thanks to Harry.
And can I just say, my hands were totally free of computers, and I couldn't work one anyway as a cameraman, so...
Thank you, Harry. It's my privilege now to introduce Daff Rees to you, who is the Head of Engineering and Technical Solutions here at NEP. And I think all of us who've had the privilege of looking at MCR21 and then having a look at this truck can just wowed. And I know some of us who worked sort of in the middle of that time period are still wowed by these TARDISes, or TARDI, if that's the plural, of how you go into them. So, Daff, in the time we've got, which is plenty, but if you could just choose what you want to tell us about them.
Certainly.
Thank you.
Certainly. Thank you very much for inviting me. It's a real pleasure to see MCR21 here, and a real pleasure to see so many of you people here as well. So thank you for coming. A couple of notices before we begin. It's great to see so many old friends. I did want to mention just one person that's here, and that's a friend of mine, Dennis Butcher. Dennis, we've worked together many times over the years. You as engineering manager, me as a vision guarantee. And I was going to mention this because Dennis, I'd like to have put on record, makes the finest marmalade this side of Staines. And I was genuinely going to mention this earlier, but the joke was going to be, but he didn't bring me a jar of marmalade tonight. But he did. But he did. So, thank you, Dennis, for this glorious jar of marmalade. I should also say, I feel a bit fraudulent standing up here tonight in front of these marvellous NEP lorries, because the person who actually put all the effort into building these lorries, Rob, is at the back there somewhere. So I'm feeling as if, you know, where is he? There. So all kudos and credit to you, Rob. Feel free to heckle as we go. So the task was really to think about the differences between MCR21 and Venus and the way that things have progressed from one to the other. And I thought, well, gosh, this is going to be a fairly easy conversation to have with plenty of differences between the two units. And I thought we could talk for hours about the differences and how things have changed and all that sort of stuff. So I thought perhaps the easier thing for me to do is to go on the MCR21 website, find the specifications for MCR21 and compare the two. And gosh, that'll be super easy. We'll be done in a few hours. So I went and had a look at the handbook for MCR21, thought that would be a good place to start. It's on the website. It's a great website to have a look at. So I started by looking at the handbook, and the first paragraph of that handbook, in the introduction, it says, and this is where I have to flip-flop with my glasses, it says, the MCR contains all the equipment required to originate a television program and can accommodate all the production and engineering staff necessary for that purpose. Cameras, cables, de-rigging equipment, etc. are normally transported by a separate vehicle. And then I thought about Venus and thought, Venus contains all the equipment required to originate a television program and can accommodate all the production and engineering staff necessary for the purpose. Cameras, cables, in a separate vehicle. So I thought, well, crikey, they might be similar after all. There might not be such a big difference. And although, of course, thinking that Venus is a state-of-the-art powerhouse of a production system, thinking, well, it can operate in all sorts of frame rates, all sorts of resolutions, I went back to that handbook and I read on. It said, the video equipment in MCR is designed to operate on 405 line 50 field, 5 to 5 line 60 field, or 65 50 field. So I thought, again, well, actually, MCR21 is itself a multi-format, multi-resolution OB unit. There's another similarity. This is getting trickier. What about flexibility, I thought? I read on. The equipment in the MCR is designed for easy removal and transport by hand to be set up in the de-rigged condition in almost any location. A set of external racks, cables and connecting boxes is supplied with MCR type 4013. The de-rig control room layout is designed to resemble the layout of the MCR interior. Well, although we don't take the stuff out to Venus, we do have a mirroring set of equipment that we put in external racks with cables and connecting boxes and de-rig this whole system to fly packs all over the world. And again, the control room layout is designed to resemble the layout of an MCR interior. Okay, well, that's another similarity. That idea has been around since MCR21 existed. So I thought, how can we now start to differentiate in the concepts between MCR21 and Venus? I thought, I've got it. I thought, what about resilience and redundancy in the event of a mains failure or similar emergency? I read on. Batteries are included so that lighting and sound equipment can be operated in the event of a mains failure or similar emergency. So, I thought things are not looking good for my talk on the differences between MCR21 and Venus. So the concepts, I suppose, are very, very similar. They're both designed as units to create a television program and to be a home for the production facility away from the production center. But of course, we've experienced and sometimes endured many, many technical revolutions since 1963, from 405 line to color, to high dynamic range, to UHD, to 8K, from copper cables to fiber optic, from mono audio to 7.1.4 object-orientated soundscapes, and of course from analog through various flavors of digital transmission to video and audio over IP, which is the core of Venus and clearly the technology that's moved on so much since the days of MCR21. So let's talk a bit about the differences in technology a bit more. And first we'll start with the sound differences and how sound has changed over the years, and I'll invite my dear friend and esteemed colleague, Mr. Neville Hooper, to talk a little bit about how things have changed over 60 years and what's in Venus.
Okay. So, Daph's clearly done a bit more homework than me in that he actually has a presentation. I'm just going to talk, but then he's vision and I'm sound. So, you know, I think that's allowed. So in terms, obviously, MCR21, as was pointed out, 20-channel sound desk with 3 main outputs. The sound desk in Venus has 56 faders, but each of those 56 faders has a second B-layer fader, and then there are a further 12 layers. So we've gone from 20, we've increased by quite some order. It also has 16 main outputs, all capable of delivering 5.1, and basically the DSP package in there gives you 1,020 channels of full signal processing. So you can see the scale has increased somewhat, but largely that is driven by the production requirements. Obviously production requirements on something like the World Cup in 1966 was very different to a more recent World Cup, where you would have somewhere in the region, I'm sure my colleagues at the back who work with HBS could give me a number of microphones, but there's a lot of microphones around the pitch, microphones all over the stadium to capture the ambience, and the kind of nuance and the level of the quality of audio that is delivered now demands that amount of processing power. Also, previously MCR21 would have been working just for the BBC and producing pictures for the BBC. Now in our trucks we can be producing a world feed that is going to millions of viewers around the world. But at the same time, we may also be producing an output for a specific client that is tailored to their requirements. So hence, we can be producing multiple feeds at that sound desk at the same time. The flexibility that we have in that processing core is, allows us to do that. Perhaps one of the biggest differences between MCR21 and a truck like Venus is the communications infrastructure. While there is some communications, they're particularly limited in MCR21, although clearly cutting edge for its time. To give you an idea, the intercom matrix in Venus today has somewhere in the region of 240 ins and 240 outs. So that's 240 different communication circuits. So there's a whole lot more people you can talk to. I mean, obviously, just with the scale of the van, there's a lot more people in the truck as well. But the flexibility in communications, and that can give us the ability to speak to people on the other side of the world or wherever. You know, again, simultaneously, also, if we had several of these trucks on site, we would join them together, and all of a sudden you're making an intercom that's twice the size. So, scalability, as Daph says, ultimately, the concept is very much the same in terms of what we're achieving. It's just the production demands have grown exponentially from the needs of the 60s. That's where we find ourselves today.
Thank you, Nev. Neville mentioned the fact that we're able to sort of combine a number of these units together to create a sum that's bigger than its parts, and that is only possible really or it's certainly made a lot easier through the IP core of these this generation of truck, because the IP element of the system enables you to scale much more readily, much more easily than you would with a monolithic or an SDI router. It also enables a lot of decentralization. So whilst the bulk of the processing can happen inside the truck, what the IP core enables you to do is to decentralize a lot of that processing as well, and to move I/O points not just from the tailboard of the unit, but also move it to wherever that need is for the I/O. So it's really changed the way that we think about designing the unit from a technical point of view. It really has enabled much easier a decentralization, moving stuff around, and means you haven't got a great big monolithic router within the unit itself, and that's been a really big boon in terms of I/O for IP systems. Clearly, the big difference between the two is the size and the amount of people that we can accommodate within Venus. I think we can accommodate about 30 people in total, which is a scale bigger than MCR21, and that's thanks in large part to the really clever sort of coach building and the expansions and the way that we can move bits of that chassis about and create a very big, comfortable space. And I hope you'll agree, if you've had a chance to look around, that it is a very comfortable place. It's not an austere place to work. It's designed to be somewhere that we can work comfortably for a long period of time. Some headlines then. That unit there is created. We can fit 10 EVSs in there, about 30 CCUs. But that really is limited by the physical space within the unit. Obviously, as I've already mentioned, with the IP system, what we can do is expand that quite easily and have much more facilities, or many more facilities, placed externally or placed in a different room or placed in a different unit and join everything together. And certainly that's the sort of concept of work at Wimbledon, where we create an enormous IP network there. I suppose when I talked about the idea that a lot of the concepts are the same between MCR21 and Venus, I suppose we are reaching a point in time where we're starting to break that tradition. We already have a fleet of units here which are designed as a means of collecting signals on site and delivering those signals back to the production center, which means that we can create trucks that are smaller than Venus. We're sort of heading towards a smaller form factor because we don't any longer need to accommodate the production crew. We just accommodate the engineering crew, the sound and the vision crew, and space to collate those signals on site and to deliver those back to the production hub. And I think that's a trend we're seeing. It certainly has an impact on our impact on the environment. We're able to create much smaller trucks, and through some creative thinking, we're also able to make sure that we minimize the use of energy on site, and that is becoming a really important piece. I think that's kind of a very quick overview of the differences between the two units that we have here, but also I think it's important to recognize the similarities between the two, and how even in Venus we see the DNA of MCR21 and the concepts behind the MCR21 solution being integrated into our solution today. And I think it's lovely to think that those ideas are still relevant, and perhaps a testament to those who designed MCR21 in the first place. Thank you.
Don't go away. Don't go away. I think some of us, as of a certain generation, when we've been in the big truck here, realised that we were fortunate in one way. I was talking to Philip Gilbert earlier. We're probably of a generation of Type 5, Type 6 BBC trucks. The one good thing as a director in that was your back was to the wall, literally. And so you didn't have editors and producers second-guessing, there's a nice shot on camera 6 or something. And we were spared from that. And I have experienced in later life, particularly in the States, the whole committee behind giving the director plenty of advice. So we were spared from that. The other thing I noted about the differences was the comms matrix. And I think that is so important because many of us know that one of the things that holds a really successful, a great outside broadcast together is the success of the comms. If they're not working properly, or if something's happened, then you can have just an okay one. There are times though, we did talk earlier about the team work that goes on between director and crew and cameras. And I do recall, I think it was Beijing, just before the 200 meters freestyle, Alistair Scott was the director, had a really tight relationship with his camera crew. and just about a minute before, all the comms went down. Well, there are some events where you can go out and say, hold it, we need to just get the cameras right. Well, you don't do that at the Olympics. It just goes. And I remember everyone was on the edge of their seats, and we saw the race go, and you wouldn't have known the director wasn't calling the shots because they were so tight, the relationship, that the camera crew knew exactly what the director wanted. They offered the shots, the vision mixer knew how to cut them up. And so there still needs to be that tremendous teamwork. But when you're dealing with lots of chains downstream and what have you, comms is so important, and all the different people on a very big project. And I think that really is one of the things that stands out. And it has to be good, doesn't it? It has to be configured well. Not only has to be there, but it has to be configured well. So that's enough of me. Any questions, please, for Daff? Let's go. I'm going to go just behind you, and then I'll come.
David Perry. Looking to the future, I'm wondering what the implication is of increased remote production, where there's going to be fewer people on site and more stuff happening back at base, and what the implication is for the AB trucks.
You're preempting our part too.
Yeah. Perhaps I should leave that
No.
You
can see whether you're right or wrong.
Yeah, it's clearly a big topic. There will always be events that everybody wants to be on site, but I think there are a number of events where people are looking to have the production team, and sometimes the engineering team or different elements. And I think that's the really interesting thing, is when you think about actually not everybody has to be in the same place, and you can decentralize the racking to somewhere in Bristol and graphics to somewhere in Poland or whatever it is. And I think that's the really interesting challenge that we've got ahead of us. For sure it changes the way that we think about designing the units, but that's a good challenge to have, and one we relish, and it's an exciting time. But I think to predict the demise of these big trucks is a little bit early. I think there's still a long life in that.
I purchased a no-LED TV, one with these LEDs layering it, and it was a bit expensive thinking the shop threw in a sound system, which all the boxes amounted to a 5.1. But it also said it could do the Atmos thing as well. So I wondered if you, with these trucks, can you originate any of these sound stages, 5.1, 7.1, Atmos?
Yeah, these trucks are all set up for 7.1.4 Atmos. Nev, wherever he is, do you want to?
Yes, Venus certainly is capable of doing 5.1+4 and doing what we call Dolby Atmos with high information. All of our trucks can do 5.1. We've been doing 5.1 since about 2005, so that's been around a long time. 5.1.4 kind of gained momentum in around 2017, so and we've been doing it since then, and that just adds height information. But one of the interesting things to note, everyone thought that Atmos was going to take off. It kind of tickled along for a while, but there's been a bit of a revisiting of it. If you have a Sky Glass television, the sound in the Sky Glass comes from the 5.1.4 rather than one of the stereo or 5.1 mixes. So all of a sudden there was a lot more interest in the 5.1+4, certainly as far as Sky were concerned. And they've done a lot of work to improve and enhance their sound coverage to take that into account. But yes, pretty much all of these trucks behind me are capable of doing 5.1+4 high information shows. So in this country, Sky and was BT, it's now TNT, are the two main kind of, and as with a lot of technologies, the first place it rears its head is in the Premier sport. So Premier League football was the first sport that was largely covered in 5.1 in this country, and then moving on to the 5.1+4, again the Premier League football. There's various other sports that have been tried as well, some to varying degrees of success. And again, it's very much broadcaster-led. If the broadcaster has a demand for it, something like Wimbledon, we only produce in 5.1 because the host broadcaster none of their clients have requested Atmos, and they don't feel the need to produce it in Atmos just to produce it in Atmos, really. So often these things can be client-led rather than us driving the technology. We will deliver the solution that the client's looking for. Which was your colleague that built these trucks? Was it someone over there? Him. Which is Rob. Rob, I've got a little question for you. No, it's not difficult. When you design and build a truck like this, and now you see them being used, are there any things that you think, if I'd known that now, I would have done it differently?
I guess the way stuff's being covered now, with more and more remote, as my ex-colleagues over there have said, because they are cool for more smaller trucks. Maybe environmental, it's a tad noisy on the vision area in that truck there, so I'd probably try and quieten that down a bit, but pretty much, I think most of the people that work in it quite like the layout and the way it's built, so.
So when we do our part 2 in the autumn, do you suspect we'll be talking about at least smaller trucks?
I would say so. What are you going to talk about then, Pat? Wheeling, June and
Well, we might ask you to talk. Thank you very much for dropping one on you. Any other questions, please? No other questions? Yeah. Let me go back there and I'll come.
Hi, David Ackroyd. Has delay been a problem you've had to overcome I wasn't thinking necessarily audio, but with IP and video and AV sync and so forth, that you had to resolve, and if so, when did you crack it?
Well, yeah, I mean, that's a double-edged thing. Video and audio delay both cause problems. In the analog days, it was all pretty simple because it was just start to finish and there was very little deviation. Funnily enough, the first time it reared its head was when we went for 5.1 Dolby E encoding, because we were unable to send the discrete signals back embedded within the video. We had to use Dolby E to encode that into a single AES carrier for transmitting it off-site. It turned out that encoding it to Dolby E took a frame. So all of a sudden there was a frame of delay you're introducing to your signal, which then had to be compensated for in the video to make sure that they remained in sync. And it's kind of escalated from there, if you like. Different technologies have different propagation delays, but thankfully, as the delay problem reared its head, so did the solutions. There's devices. The initial one was the Valid, and now there's a device called Hitomi. So you can run a test signal through your signal chain and compare the audio and video and work out what your delay is, and then apply the relevant delay and get them back in time.
What about total delay?
Yeah, total delay. So.
Between A and B, I mean, it makes sense to the system.
Yeah, there's some degree of latency, but Daph could talk more. I mean, it's more an issue of sound having to delay to match the pictures because of the video latency. But again, it depends on different bits of kit have different latencies. To use the example of the Kahuna mixer in these trucks, it does format fusion. There's some processing to upscale or downscale, and that takes time, so we then have to delay the audio to match. But we have the tools now to work out what that delay is, and then we can compensate accordingly. So, have you got anything to add?
It's such a curious topic, isn't it? Because with a range of cameras, for example, all watching the same event, different cameras will have different latencies, and so trying to match everything up gets very, very difficult. Your point about sort of glass-to-glass latency, in some ways, as long as you manage that, arguably that can be quite big if you want it to be, because you're just, as long as everything is in time with each other. But it's a topic often debated.
Okay, just to echo my original question on the MCR21, it may be commercially sensitive to give an answer to it, but what is the sort of cost, approximately, of if you were going out and saying, right, this is what we're going to spend on building a new truck, Are we talking tens of millions or hundreds of millions?
Plenty.
Philip Gilbert, BBC Director, long time past. Could I ask about recording systems? Do you automatically record the output of all the cameras all the time? And how does the EVS link into all that? And can that all be done in the beautiful Venus? Or is that somewhere else?
It depends on the type of the show, really, whether you just record a certain number of cameras or all of them. There are different technologies to do that depending on the application and whether it's just for post-production or whether it's obviously for replay. Replay tends to be EVSs, as you've alluded to, and typically you'd record each angle on an EVS chassis. You can record perhaps up to 10 angles on a single EVS chassis, which is that big. And it really depends, and we change the way that we change the technology that we use to record the different angles and the different cameras based on the type of show that it is and based on the client's preference. So it's not a very clear answer, I'm sorry, but there's lots of ways of doing it.
But it's one way to do it all in Venus.
Absolutely.
Yeah. That's what I'm wondering. Thank you.
Really ask personal questions like that, Philip. Ian Rutter.
Hello, I'm Ian Rutter, ex-VT editor at the BBC. I was very fortunate to be trained as an engineer by BBC's engineering department at Evesham. Now in the age of freelance, everybody being freelance, who's doing the training for the future generation of television engineers and cameramen and all the rest?
We'd like to think that we do a lot of that. We bring and we look for new talent frequently. We develop the talent, or we do a lot of that sort of work, and we develop engineering skills from entry level to guarantee level. I think there is much more training in the industry than perhaps is perceived. I think perhaps not enough, but we are really doing what we can, and I think every OB company is doing what they can to bring talent through. It's a really important topic, and it's not something that's being ignored, and I think it's great that it's getting so much attention.
I think one thing we're very keen on in the Royal Television Society is if you look around the room, we find very few women coming through in broadcast engineering. And I mean, I have my own thoughts on that sometimes it's down to schools at 6, 7, 8, that children and girls are not being shown that probably engineering is an area they might like to explore. And I think the damage is even done when people get to 16 because they've already set their minds on other things. So I think it's a big issue to get how we can get more women into broadcast engineering. I think we've probably got time for 2 or 3 more questions. One of those will be from Nick, and then I'll come.
Just slightly more general question to David. You did talk about the comparison, and it was very interesting what you had to say between MCR21 and Venus. Do you think it's useful, I mean, we're talking about sort of young people, do you think it's useful for them to know about the technology in MCR21? You know, is it as a base level that you can go on to understand about Venus?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think for me, speaking as a sound engineer, microphones are analog. So you can have the fanciest digital truck, but it still starts off as an analog that goes down a copper cable that can have induced noise, or, you know, with a balanced circuit, lack of common mode rejection, or have a leg off and have no phantom. You can't fault find if you don't understand the simplest concepts. So you have to start off with the simple concepts and learn the basic and build up. And MCR21 is absolutely a good way to show that small scale. You know, it's similar concepts as already discussed in Venus, just more of it. And so the same rules apply. It's simple technology, just the scale is bigger. So, and I think that would be my thing. I don't think you can be a good engineer without understanding the simple concepts first, and simple science. And, you know, referring back to the earlier question as well,
You know, we have done a lot of work. I graduated 25 years ago and stayed in touch with the colleges that I went to. You know, we speak to colleges and we're always keen to recruit and speak to students and engage young people because we recognise there's a growing skills shortage, and you know, we want to do as much as we can to try and help that. You know, not least because I'd like to retire, so I can't speak for anyone else. But you know, we need the next generation to come through. We need to engage people, and we're keen to work as much as we can, as much as we're able, to try and help and support that.
Okay, so Ed Calvey, Q3 Media Training, someone who can help with that training. A facetious one, maybe, but comparing MCR21 to your latest IP trucks, what's the power on to pictures kind of time? With the new IP infrastructure, I wonder if that's maybe an area MCR21 might win.
You're probably right. Yeah. Different things boot up at different speeds these days and with different levels of noise. And it is you know, which is why the things that take the longest to start up are always, you know, on a battery backup, so that hopefully we don't have to wait for them to restart just before kickoff. But it's all hopefully considered and it's all mitigated against. But yeah, it's an interesting challenge in the IP world.
So do we have any final questions on it?
Just picking up on a comment that I've often heard from colleagues these days, problems are solved not so much by thinking about a problem from first principles and a good, sound, basic knowledge of electronics and engineering. It's a question of switching it off and on again. So how often are your operational problems solved by that approach?
Sometimes that approach works, but as Neville alluded to, I think everyone here has a fantastic engineering understanding of the technology that we're using, and we're far from a world where that is the default way to remedy a problem. There's still a lot of engineering thinking that goes in before. You might eventually wonder, perhaps I should switch it off and on again. But yeah, I mean, it's the nature of the things that we use these days.
So does anyone want one final question? No. Philip.
Could I just follow up on the notion of the smaller vehicles and the remote direction? Is that something that the client is demanding, or is that something that you're offering?
I mean, there's some vehicles outside actually that perform that exact role that were developed in conjunction with Sky, and they came to us with a proposal and we worked it through and arrived at a solution. But it very much depends, you know, as I've been saying to a number of people today, there's a lot of chat about remote production, but remote production is different things to different people. Every client will have their own concept of how they want to deliver their remote production, and we're here to facilitate that. So, you know, we can advise and we can offer solutions, you know, and it depends very much on the client and what the client are looking for. So, yeah, I wasn't being facetious when I said both. It's absolutely both. It's if they have a fixed way of how they'd like to do it, great, or we can offer a solution, you know, whatever they want.
Daph, Neville, thank you so much. I'm sure you'd like to share your appreciation.